Have you ever walked into a room and felt like a smudge on a painting, present but not quite meant to be there? That was Nora the night she walked into the Hargrove Gala. Not Nora. The story doesn't belong to anyone in that file. Her name was Piper Voss, 26 years old. She worked the early shift at a print shop on Clement Street, the kind of place that smelled like toner and burnt coffee, and where the overhead light above her station had been flickering for 3 months and nobody fixed it. She had $340s in checking, $12 in savings, a studio apartment she shared with a cat named Gerald, and an invitation to a charity gala she absolutely did not belong at. The invitation had come through her boss, who had come through his brother-in-law, who had come through some roundabout favor network that Piper didn't fully understand and didn't ask about. All she knew was that the Hargrove Foundation annual gala was the kind of event where a single table cost more than she made in a year, and she was going as a +1 to a colleague who had canceled that morning with a sinus infection. She could have not gone. She almost didn't go. But the dress she'd borrowed from her neighbor was burgundy silk, and it fit her like it had been made for her, and Gerald had knocked over her coffee 3 times that morning, and she thought, fine, I'll go to the stupid gala. What's the worst that can happen? The Aldermere Hotel had a lobby that made Piper feel like she'd wandered into a foreign country. Chandeliers that could flatten a bus. Marble floors the color of old cream. People moving in that particular slow, expensive way of people who have never once had to rush for anything. She checked her coat, accepted a glass of champagne she didn't intend to drink, and found a spot near the far wall where she could observe the event without being observed. She was good at that, disappearing in plain sight. It was one of her better skills. The gala was for pediatric cancer research, a cause she actually cared about, which helped. The room was full of the predictably wealthy. Men in dark suits with the kind of tans you only get from owning a boat, women in gowns that cost a semester of tuition. There was a string quartet playing something Piper recognized but couldn't name. There were waiters who moved like ghosts. She was reading the silent auction catalog. A weekend in Tuscany, a private wine tasting, a hand-painted portrait by some artist whose name meant nothing to her. When the shift happened, she felt it before she saw it. That particular change in a room's atmosphere when someone enters who everyone else already knows. She looked up. The man who had just walked in was not the tallest in the room, not the loudest, didn't do any of the things people do when they want to be noticed. He spoke briefly to the man at the door, accepted a drink with a nod, and then simply stood there scanning the room with the quiet, unhurried attention of someone who had never in his life felt the need to announce himself. Someone near Piper murmured a name. She caught the first part, Corbin, and then lost the rest in the ambient noise. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark-haired, jaw like it had been put there deliberately. There were 2 men who had come in behind him who were very large and very still and very carefully not looking at him, which meant they were absolutely looking at him. Piper looked back at the silent auction catalog. Weekend in Tuscany. Starting bid, $8,000. She made a note to not bid. The evening moved the way these evenings move. Speeches, applause, the clink of expensive silverware. Piper ate something with truffle in it and thought it tasted like ambition. She watched a woman in a white gown navigate a complex social snub with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. She listened to a man near her explain the tax implications of charitable giving to a woman who clearly already knew. She was thinking about leaving. Gerald would need feeding and she had the early shift when someone's elbow caught her arm. It was a waiter, young, nervous, carrying a tray. The collision was minor, victimless. The champagne flute tipped, and a generous arc of sparkling wine landed squarely on the sleeve of the man standing next to her, the man who had just walked in. Corbin. He looked down at his sleeve. Piper looked at the sleeve. Then Piper said, "Well, it could have been red wine." There was a half-second of silence in the immediate vicinity that felt geological. He looked at her. She held the look. Not because she was brave, she genuinely wasn't feeling particularly brave, but because looking away first seemed worse somehow, like flinching before you've actually been hit. "That's your consolation?" he said. "I'm working with limited material," she said. "I don't know you and I just watched someone else spill on you, so full condolence mode feels premature, but for what it's worth, the jacket's dark. It'll dry." He studied her for a moment the way people look at something that surprised them in a window. Not hostile exactly, more like recalibrating. "Corbin," he said. "I got that much," she said. "Piper, do you always respond to accidents with triage assessments?" "Only when panicking seems like a waste of everyone's time." The 2 large men behind him had not moved. They were now very carefully studying the middle distance. Corbin handed his glass to a passing waiter, looked down at his sleeve once more, and then unexpectedly the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more like the idea of one. "Fair enough," he said. She thought that was the end of it. She turned back to the room, mildly pleased with herself, fully intending to finish her water and find her coat. He didn't leave. "You're not with anyone here," he said. "It wasn't a question. My +1 got a sinus infection, and you came anyway." "The dress was already borrowed," she said. "Seemed wasteful not to. What do you do, Piper?" She considered the gap between his life and hers, estimated it at approximately 1 yacht, and said, "I run a print shop." Which was not entirely true. She worked at one, but she'd been there long enough that the distinction felt academic. What kind of printing? Business cards, flyers, the occasional wedding program. Once a full-color portrait of a man's parrot, laminated for display purposes. For display where? He didn't say, and I didn't ask. The corner of his mouth moved again. More deliberate this time. They talked for 22 minutes. She knew, because she checked her watch when it ended and counted backward, the way you do when something surprises you, and you want to be able to report the exact dimensions of it later. He asked questions the way smart people ask questions. Not to fill silence, but because he actually wanted to know. He wanted to know what the hardest job she'd ever printed was. A memorial program where the family kept changing the photo 4 times the night before. He wanted to know if she'd grown up in the city. No Central Valley, which explained certain things, she said, though she didn't specify which things. He didn't talk about himself the way men at these events usually did. The portfolio, the holdings, the strategic partnerships. And she didn't ask. Somewhere around minute 18 she became aware that other people in the room were aware of them. Not intrusively. More the way a room's temperature changes when 2 weather systems meet. At minute 22, someone touched his arm. A man in gray, urgent, quiet. Corbin excused himself. "It was good to meet you, Piper. Statistically, the sleeve thing was going to happen to someone," she said. "Glad it was you." He paused. "Why?" She considered it honestly. "You didn't make it into a whole thing." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Then he nodded. Once, the kind of nod that means more than it looks like, and walked away. She went home. Fed Gerald. Told him about the gala with the level of detail you only extend to a pet or a diary. Went to sleep. She did not think about Corbin, or she tried not to. She was moderately successful. The print shop on Monday was the print shop on Monday. The flickering light, the hum of the big machines, the steady procession of people who needed things made legible. A woman who wanted her book club flyers, a contractor who needed 500 business cards by Thursday, a teenager who was printing band posters and kept asking about bleed margins. Piper was cutting a ream of cardstock when Danny, who worked the front desk, appeared at the door of the workroom with a look on her face. "There's someone here for a quote," Danny said. "He asked specifically for you. I don't do quotes." He said he knows that. Piper looked up. Corbin was standing at the front counter in a dark coat that had clearly not suffered lasting damage from the champagne incident. He was looking at the sample binders on the counter with the same focused attention he'd turned on everything else. She came out from the workroom. "This is not how quotes work," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't actually need a quote. Then what do you need?" He looked at her directly, not unkindly. "I have an event next Saturday. I would like you to come." She waited. He didn't add anything. "That's it?" she said. "That's it. You could have called. I don't have your number. You seem like someone who could have gotten it anyway." "I could have," he said. "I didn't want to do it that way." She stood there with a spool of white ribbon in her hand and considered the situation. The situation was, a man she had met once at a charity gala, where she had said unimpressive things about his champagne-soaked sleeve, had come to her place of work on a Monday morning in a coat that cost more than her rent, to ask her to an event, with no phone number acquisition, no intermediary, just showing up. "What kind of event?" she said. "A dinner, private, nothing like the gala." "How private?" 12 people. A house outside the city. Low-key. She looked at him. "You know I looked you up. A beat. What did you find?" "Enough," she said. "Corbin Ashford, real estate. The kind that doesn't need to advertise. And some other things that were harder to verify." He didn't flinch, didn't explain. And I'm still standing here," she said. Something in his expression shifted. Not relief, exactly. "Recognition Saturday," he said. "I'll think about it," she said. She went on Saturday. The house outside the city was in Marin, which she should have guessed. Old money and new discretion, eucalyptus trees and fog. It was not a subtle house. It was also not showy in the way that money usually wants to be. It was the kind of house that had existed long enough that it didn't need to try. Stone walls, Gardens that were designed to look like they hadn't been. 12 people, as promised. She recognized one of them from the news and kept that to herself. The others were introduced by first name only, which she noted without commenting on. Dinner was held around a table that sat everyone without crowding. The conversation was the kind that happened between people who had been talking to each other a long time. Shorthand, callbacks, a history she wasn't part of. She didn't try to insert herself. She listened. She ate something with fennel in it and decided fennel was underrated. At some point, a woman across the table, late 50s, silver hair, the bearing of someone who had made significant decisions professionally, looked at Piper with open curiosity. "How do you know Corbin?" she asked, not hostile, genuinely interested. "He spilled champagne on me," Piper said. "He spilled champagne on you," the woman repeated. "The physics are complicated. It was a waiter, he was adjacent." The woman looked at Corbin, then back at Piper, and seemed to arrive at some internal conclusion that she kept to herself, but which manifested as a slight smile that stayed for the rest of the evening. After dinner, the group dispersed in the way these things happen. Small conversations, the drift toward the garden. Corbin found her near the window, the one that looked out over the hillside, the city lights diffuse and scattered below. "You're comfortable with silence," he said. "Comes with the job. Machines are loud, brakes are quiet. Most people fill silence. Most people are nervous," she said. "I was raised by a woman who could go 3 hours without saying anything and was absolutely fine. It calibrated me." He was looking at the lights. "My work," he said. "The parts you found that were harder to verify." She waited. "It's not simple," he said, "and I'm not going to tell you it is. The people in my life know what I do. Some of it operates in legal gray." He paused. "Doesn't. I'm not a prosecutor," she said. "No, but you're someone who values accuracy. I could tell from the way you talked about the printing. You care that things are right, that the edges are clean, bleed margins matter. So do these," he said. "I wanted you to know what you were deciding." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I want you to decide," he said. "Not figure it out later." That was the moment she would think later. Not the gala, not the Monday morning at the print shop, not the dinner. The moment where he handed her the information and stood back. Most men, most people would have managed it. Would have parceled the truth out in digestible pieces, timed for when she was already in too deep to care. He did not do that, she said. "I'll stay for the rest of the evening," he said. All right. It wasn't a declaration, it was an answer. She decided that was better. Over the following weeks, she learned a number of things. She learned that Corbin Ashford had built the legitimate half of his empire from nothing. Literally from a rental property in Oakland he'd bought at 23 with money he'd borrowed and spent 6 years paying back. The other half had grown from relationships formed in that same period in neighborhoods where certain kinds of business were conducted, in ways the city didn't formally acknowledge. She learned that he had a half-brother named Everything, apparently after a saint, who he never talked about but whose name appeared in his phone as a single initial, T. She learned that he made very good coffee, which surprised her because it was such a domestic, ordinary skill. And he didn't seem like someone who'd spent time acquiring domestic, ordinary skills. She learned that he laughed rarely and without warning, and that when he did it changed the whole architecture of his face. She also learned more slowly that being around him came with certain textures she hadn't expected. The first one she noticed was the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room that already contained people who knew him. Not rudely, the pauses were brief, polite. But present, she was being assessed. She understood that. The second one was an evening in October when she was leaving his building and a woman she didn't know stepped into her path on the sidewalk. Young, perfectly put together, smile that didn't reach anything. "You know he does this," the woman said. Piper stopped. "Does what?" "Picks someone ordinary, keeps them for a while. It's a pattern." Piper looked at her. The woman had the particular energy of someone who was delivering a message they'd been asked to deliver and didn't love the job. "Who sent you?" Piper said. The woman blinked. "Because if this is a concern from someone who actually knows him, I'd rather hear it directly," Piper said. "And if this is meant to scare me off, you should know that I work in a room with 3 industrial printers running simultaneously. My threshold for intimidation is pretty high." The woman said nothing. "Have a good night," Piper said, and walked to the corner and got into her car. She told Corbin that evening, not to cause trouble, because she thought he should know. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Vivienne Holt." "Who is that?" "Someone who has reasons to want you to leave," he said. He wasn't evasive about it. "A business arrangement that ended." She misread the terms. "What were the terms?" "That it was business," he said. She decided it was more. Piper nodded. Is she dangerous? She can be, to me specifically? He looked at her steadily. I'm going to make sure she's not. I'm not asking you to fix it, Piper said. I'm asking so I know. She won't move on you directly, he said. She's not reckless. She'll try other routes. Then I'll deal with the other routes when they come, Piper said. He was quiet again. Then, most people would have wanted me to just handle it. Most people probably let others handle most things, she said. I have a flickering light over my workstation that's been broken for 4 months. I ordered the replacement bulb myself on Tuesday. It arrived today. I'll fix it tomorrow. She paused. I fix things when I can. I don't when I can't. But I like to know which category I'm in. He was looking at her the way he had that first evening at the gala minus the recalibration. The look had settled into something more decided. Piper, he said. Yeah? I'm not going to do this casually. She thought about what that meant coming from him. The weight of what it implied. The world he operated in, the specific gravity of being connected to a man whose name opened certain doors and closed others, who moved through the city like a current underwater. She thought about Gerald, about the print shop, about the studio apartment, and the $340 in checking. She thought about the way he'd driven 40 minutes to a shop on Clement Street on a Monday morning, rather than have someone pull her number from a database, because he hadn't wanted to do it that way. I know, she said, neither am I. The winter came in. The eucalyptus smelled sharp and cold. She started keeping a second set of clothes at his house, which happened gradually enough that she didn't notice until she did, and then decided not to make a thing of it. Vivian Holt tried 3 more routes. The first was a whisper campaign. Things said to people at events that made their way back to Piper filtered through 2 or 3 degrees of removal, small distortions attached. Piper corrected them when they mattered, ignored them when they didn't. The second was a phone call to her boss at the print shop, which accomplished nothing because her boss had the attention span of a golden retriever for gossip, and had already forgotten it by the next morning. The third was the one that actually landed. She found out in November from a mutual contact that Vivienne had gone to Corbin's half-brother, T, with something. She didn't know what exactly. What she knew was that Corbin came home one evening with the specific tension in his shoulders of someone who had just had a conversation they hadn't planned for. She didn't ask immediately. She made coffee. She sat across from him. After a while he said, Thomas is going to be a problem. How much of a problem? He wants me to end this. He paused. You, she absorbed that. Why? Because he thinks you're a liability. Because Vivian convinced him you can't be trusted in proximity to what we do because... He stopped. Something crossed his face that she hadn't seen before. Because I've never introduced him to someone I was serious about, and he doesn't know how to factor it in. She looked at him. Are you going to end it? He said it flatly. Not defensive, like he was making sure they were using the same word. Yes, he met her eyes. No, then what happens with Thomas? I handle Thomas, he said. The way I should have handled him about a number of things a long time ago. Is that going to be ugly? Yes, but you'll handle it. Yes. She nodded, wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Okay. He looked at her. That's it? You told me, she said, in detail, up front. That's what you said you'd do. She met his eyes. I'm holding you to that. The conversation with Thomas was ugly. She wasn't there for it, and she wasn't debriefed. What she knew was that it happened, and afterward there was a period of 2 weeks when Corbin was very quiet and worked very long hours and came home with the look of someone who had paid a debt they'd been putting off. He didn't shut her out. That was the thing. He was quiet, but he kept showing up, physically, in small, reliable ways. He brought groceries once when she'd mentioned running low. He appeared at the print shop on a Thursday evening when she was working late and sat in the waiting area reading something on his phone with the same focused silence she'd seen at the gala, not asking for anything, just there. You don't have to wait, she said. I know, he said. She went back to cutting cardstock. He stayed until she was done. By December, Thomas had been managed. She didn't ask the full vocabulary of that, and Vivian Holt had relocated to Portland, which Corbin said was unrelated, and she mostly believed him. She was at his house when she found the photo. Not snooping. She was looking for a charger and opened the wrong drawer. A photograph, physical, old enough to have that slightly faded quality. A younger Corbin, maybe 25, with a woman she didn't recognize and a boy who might have been Thomas before everything. She put it back. That evening she said, there was a photo in the second drawer. He didn't hesitate. My mother. That's Thomas at 12. Who's the woman? My mother, he said again. And then she understood the photo wasn't of 3 people. It was Corbin and Thomas, and the woman was their mother. And from the way he'd said it twice, there was a lot in that sentence she wasn't going to get to all at once. Tell me when you want to, she said. He nodded. He told her in February, a Tuesday, over very bad takeout she'd brought from a place that always disappointed them and they kept ordering from anyway. She listened. She didn't fill the silences. When he was done, he said, I've never talked about this outside of. He stopped. You don't have to justify it, she said. Most people don't talk about the hard stuff. It's not a character flaw. I'm not most people. No, she agreed. But you're still allowed to have parts that take time. He looked at her across the bad takeout containers, with an expression she had become fluent in by then, the look that meant he was recalibrating again, except now it was recalibrating upward towards something. Piper, he said. I know, she said. She did. Spring came back around. The flickering light above her workstation was fixed, had been fixed since October, replaced by her with a ladder borrowed from storage and a bulb she'd ordered herself. The machines hummed. The city moved. She kept the studio apartment on the lease. She was practical about things like that, but spent most nights across the bridge in Marin, in a house that had stopped feeling like foreign territory somewhere around the time she'd learned where the good coffee cups were kept and stopped asking. She was not someone who had wanted this life. She had not planned for it, had not hoped for it, in the way people hope for specific fates. She had planned for the print shop and the early shifts and Gerald and the $340 in checking. She had not planned for a man in a dark jacket, looking at her across a crowded room with an expression that recalibrated into something she hadn't been looking for. But she had also learned by then that the most important decisions of her life had never been the ones she'd planned. The gala invitation had come through 4 degrees of separation and a colleague's sinus infection. The dress had been borrowed. The champagne had been spilled by a nervous waiter with bad spatial awareness. She had said an unremarkable thing about dry cleaning, and the corner of his mouth had moved, and neither of them had looked away first. Bleed margins matter. So do the edges you don't plan for. The ones that arrive without announcement, which turn out to be the ones that hold everything together.